Hey guys, I'm really sick, so pardon my voice. Welcome back to me revisiting movies I previously reviewed 5 years ago. Last time we covered A Whisker Away, which I reevaluated as an extremely mixed bag that has its heart in the right place, but muddies its own themes and narrative choices a lot. Now we're going to look at Over the Moon, a movie from Pearl Studio available on Netflix. I have not really thought about Over the Moon all that much over the years, so when I went back to my old standalone review for this video, I was shocked at how angry I was at the movie despite giving it a positive score. I liked the movie fine, especially as someone who at the time recently moved to the States from Taiwan, so I was enamored with the showcase of Asian culture, but I think I was just disappointed by how the second and third acts abandoned that in favor of a very cartoony fantasy setting on the moon, which, to be fair, very understandable. The character designs on the moon are mostly just blobs apart from the weird looking bubble chickens. It's also the part of the movie that loses a lot of its momentum with some glaring pacing issues. One thing I've always been consistent in my takes on this movie though is my dislike for Gobi, who I found incredibly annoying at the time, especially for how much screen time he took up in the back half of the movie, which was particularly frustrating because I originally thought that his pseudo-dynamic with Fei-Fei was taking up space that should have been used to further flesh out Fei-Fei and Chin's dynamic. And that was probably my biggest sentiment coming out of the movie, wanting to see more of it and just being disappointed that I didn't. It's just that all of that was under the veil of a lot of pent-up anger towards the movie, even though I generally liked everything else about it. So has Over the Moon gotten better with time? If you asked me this question about a year or two ago, I would have said yes. I've come around to appreciate the musical numbers more. I actually give more credit to the animation, which I found a bit too simple at the time, but nowadays it's honestly pretty beautiful. And the characters plus bits and pieces of the dialogue are fun. And the movie's message about letting go of lost loved ones and finding connections with the people in front of you while carrying the legacy of the people you've lost is still pretty moving. I keep coming back to that one scene where Chana is briefly reunited with her love in a beautifully animated, painstaking, and gorgeous sequence with amazing vocal performances from both, and how that scene just perfectly captures her anguish and longing. But liking this movie more at the time of that particular rewatch had to do with the fact that another movie from the same studio was released around the same time. Monkey King 2023 was a movie that I straight up did not like in any way, shape, or form. Not any of its characters, or its dialogue, or its writing, and even its animation, in which I found the character designs to be worse looking than Over the Moon's. This rewatch allowed me to reconnect with the movie's core themes and appreciate the characters and their journeys more, with the only thing I substantially didn't like still being Gobi. However, this rewatch in November 2025 is in a time post-Ne Zha 2, where authentic Chinese stories from mainland China are proven to reign supreme. So the sort of Americanized elements of Over the Moon felt a bit more pronounced on this rewatch, and it gave me a bit of a hard time reconnecting with the movie as a whole. I honestly feel like I've gone back to my original 6 out of 10 rating for this movie, and even for the same reasons, but not as vitriolic in tone as before. I still don't really like Gobi, but I have come around to appreciating some of his involvement and vocal performance. But I still think his screen time could have been traded for an actual dynamic between Fei-Fei and Chin, which I still found lacking a lot. And in a time post K-pop Demon Hunters where Ken Jeong can deliver a funny and earnest animated performance, it's a little grating going back to Gobi's non-humor in this movie, where we try to pass off annoying as funny. I also noticed this time around that the dialogue is a little basic, with a particular sour spot being Chana's lines, which are just her saying her motivations out loud without much variation or character. At the very least, Philippa So gave a good performance to rectify that. I remember making a big deal of the gift being in the mooncake that Fei-Fei's stepmother gives her and how that comes out of nowhere. That does actually have some historical context. In rebelling against the Mongols, the Han passed secret messages within mooncake deliveries to coordinate a rebellion. So the stepmother was trying to connect with Fei-Fei through that historical context by sharing a part of her identity the gift for Chang'e, within the mooncake passed from her to Feifei. It's actually a pretty wholesome revelation with the context that obviously should have been put within the movie itself. I also think that the final act should have been longer, because while the revelation and reflections of Feifei and Chang'e are beautiful and extremely heartfelt, it is only one musical number and everything's resolved without much narrative nuance or a lot of struggle. I didn't expect to have this sort of back and forth relationship with Over the Moon, going from thinking it's just good to thinking it's great, and then back to my original consensus. But I'm not as frustrated as before. I do really appreciate what this movie tries to do and even what it does right and well. I think it's a sweet movie that people will be able to connect to, especially if they've gone through the loss of a loved one. However, in this day and age, when Chinese media is popping off, it's hard to get past the fact that the more basic elements sort of hold this movie back, which I can only imagine were at the whims of some mandates by Netflix. Certainly not as many as Monkey King potentially had, which I know was the one where Netflix was much more involved. But yeah, for now, Over the Moon retains that 6 out of 10 I gave it 5 years back, but it is still very much a sweet movie. Now, it'll take a bit before the Soul re-review comes out, especially with finals coming up, but it should come out by the end of December, followed very closely by Ride Your Wave Revisited. As always, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Thank you for watching, and catch you next time.